The tray was still spinning on the linoleum when Mara finally got her voice back. It had been a full rotation and a half. She would count later. The ceramic coffee mug making 3 complete revolutions before settling against the foot of the counter. The scrambled eggs she had carried for table 9 were everywhere. On her apron, on her left shoe, in a pale smear across the black rubber mat she stood on 12 hours a day. The diner had gone so quiet, she could hear the tinsel on the Christmas wreath above the register shifting in the heated air from the vent. Every booth, every counter stool, every table set with paper placemats printed with snowflakes had gone still. Leo was standing on the vinyl seat of the corner booth with his socks showing, because he always pulled off his shoes in public no matter how many times she told him not to. He was 4 years old and approximately 3 feet of unfiltered inquiry. And he had his small hands braced on the table and his chin tilted up, and he was looking directly at the man sitting across from him in the way that children look at things they have already decided they like. The man in the corner booth had not moved. He had a cup of black coffee, a folded newspaper, and the settled, unhurried quality of someone who had never needed to fill silence with noise. He was in a charcoal suit on a Tuesday morning in a diner that charged $4.25 for a cup of that coffee, and he wore it the way a surgeon wears a coat, as though it were simply the correct thing for the work he did. His dark eyes were on Leo with an expression Mara could not immediately name. Leo pointed at him with one small finger and said, "Mister, are you my new daddy?" That was when Mara's tray hit the floor. She had come in at 5:30 that morning after dropping Leo at the subsidized daycare 2 blocks east, still wearing the wool hat she never remembered to take off until she was already clocked in. December in this city came with a particular cold that got into joints and collarbones, and the gap between a coat that fit 3 years ago and jeans she had owned since before Leo was born. She was 7 weeks behind on rent, which at $200 a week worked out to $1,400 she did not have. And the diner ran its Christmas rush from the first week of December through the 26th, which meant double shifts and numb feet and tips that varied wildly between $1.50 and a $50 bill left once by a man she never saw again. She had learned not to bank on the $50 days. The corner booth had been occupied by the same man for 11 mornings running. Seat 4, corner table, always between 7 and 9. He ordered a black coffee and sometimes the wheat toast, read his newspaper, or sat looking out at the gray street with the quality of absolute stillness that had made Mara notice him first and then make herself stop noticing. Because noticing things like that was a habit she had trained herself out of. His name, according to the reservation log that the diner owner kept more out of courtesy than policy, was Volkov. He tipped exactly $50 every time, folded under the saucer. And he never asked for anything except once when the coffee was slow, and he simply looked up, met her eyes, and said nothing. And she had somehow known to bring the carafe. She had not brought Leo to work before. The daycare had called at 6:45 to say their heat had failed, and they were closing for the day. And Mara's only option had been to bring Leo in and set him up in the break room with his crayons and his orange juice, and the specific instructions that he was not to move from that chair until she came for him. Leo had listened to this instruction for approximately 40 minutes before wandering out through the swinging door and installing himself in the nearest available seat, which happened to be the far end of the corner booth where a large, contained man in a charcoal suit was reading a newspaper. "Leo," Mara said, and her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. She crossed the diner floor, stepping over the rolling mug, and took her son by the back of his sweater. "I'm so sorry. He doesn't know better. Leo, come here, please, right now." Leo resisted the way 4-year-olds resist, which was by going completely limp and making himself impossible to lift without making a scene. "Mama, I'm talking." "I can see that." She looked at the man. He was looking at her, not at Leo. And there was something in the way he looked at her that she could not immediately catalog. Not irritation. Not the particular contempt that men in good suits sometimes brought into diners. The flat assessment that said they had already placed her and found the placement satisfying. Something quieter than that. A kind of attention. "He's 4, she said, as an explanation. "I know," the man said. His voice was low and carried a faint accent she couldn't place geographically. "He told me." Leo, who had been watching this exchange with the absorbed attention of someone at a very interesting play, looked between them and said, "She's my mama. Her name is Mara. We live on Cortlandt Street, but not for very much longer because of the money thing. A warmth is here for you as well. And if you want to hear the rest of this story, stay with us. There is a great deal more." Mara felt her face go hot. "Leo, that's what you said. That's a private thing we talked about." Leo appeared to consider this. "Oh," he said, and seemed genuinely sorry. The way children are genuinely sorry for approximately 4 seconds before the apology dissolves into whatever comes next. What came next was that the door to the diner opened and the December air came in with it. And with the December air came Dex Callahan. She knew his footsteps before she turned around. 4 years of knowing those footsteps, the particular weight of them, the way his left heel came down harder than his right, and the body's old, automatic inventory she had never fully unlearned. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a jacket that cost more than her monthly rent at a time when that amount still represented something to him. And he looked at her the way he had looked at her since the last year of their relationship. Like she was a problem he was mildly irritated to still be encountering. "There she is," he said, to no one in particular. The way he'd learned to say things that were addressed to her, but performed for the room. He dropped into a counter stool without asking to be seated. "I've been calling." "I know," she said. "You look tired, Mara." He glanced at her apron, the egg still drying on it. "You also look like you've been wearing that apron for about 15 hours. "I've been working," she said. "Right." He picked up the laminated menu even though he had no intention of ordering. "I came about Leo's Christmas. I want him for the 23rd. My mother's doing a thing." "You can text me about the schedule. I'm working." Dex looked around the diner with the measured performance of a man finding his surroundings wanting. "Is that what you call it?" He said it without a question mark, the way he had learned to say things that required no answer because the answer was already contained in the contempt. "I told you a year ago you could go back to school. You didn't. So." He spread his hands to indicate the diner, her apron, the egg. She kept her voice level. She was practiced at keeping her voice level. "I'm going to need you to text me, Dex." He noticed Leo then, in the corner booth, and something in his face shifted. He stood from the stool and crossed the floor and looked at his son sitting across from a man in a charcoal suit. And for a moment, Mara watched him recalibrate the situation. Because Dex was good at reading rooms. It was one of the things she had liked about him once. "Who is this?" he said to Mara, meaning the man. "A customer," she said. Dex looked at the man. The man looked at Dex. Neither of them said anything, and the quality of that silence was different from the silence before. The man in the charcoal suit had set down his newspaper. His hands were on the table, flat, relaxed, the way hands are when the person to whom they belong has made a decision and no longer needs to hold anything. "Come here, bud," Dex said to Leo, and lifted him out of the booth. Leo submitted to this with his usual equanimity, and then immediately said to the man in the booth, "I'll come back." "Leo, leave the gentleman alone," Mara said. The man looked at her then, briefly, one unhurried sweep, and said to her in a voice low enough that Dex at 3 feet away might have missed it, "He's fine." It was 2 words. It landed in her chest like a warm hand pressed briefly flat. Dex carried Leo to the counter and set him on a stool, and turned back to Mara with the particular arrangement of his face she had come to know as his public performance smile. The one that looked like consideration and was actually contempt held in a shape the room would accept. "You know, you really have let yourself go," he said, just below conversational volume, aiming it at her specifically. "I mean honestly, Mara, you're 28. You look like you're 40. He glanced at her apron again. "This is what you want Leo to see growing up. That his mother's, what, a diner waitress. On her feet all day for what? $2.20 a shift," she said, "plus tips." He shook his head slowly, a man correcting a child's arithmetic. "I'll call about the 23rd. He did not look at the man in the corner booth on his way out. He did not need to. Dex had always been comfortable leaving rooms the way he entered them, which was believing himself to be the most important thing in them. The diner returned to its noise slowly, the way rooms do after the air has been disturbed. Mara turned to retrieve what was left of the scrambled eggs from table 9, and when she passed the corner booth, she did not look at the man who was sitting there. She kept her eyes forward and her breathing steady, and she focused on the floor in front of her feet. The particular act of moving forward that she had been practicing since the day she packed a bag with Leo strapped to her hip and walked out of an apartment on the east side that had Dex's name on the lease. She did not look. She also knew that he was watching her. That evening, on the walk to pick up Leo, her phone rang from a number she didn't have saved. She almost let it go. She picked up on the 4th ring. "Ms. Voss." The voice was female, businesslike, with a warmth running under the professionalism the way warm water runs under cold ice. "My name is Nadia. I work with Mr. Volkov. He'd like to offer you a solution to the Cortlandt Street situation, if you're available to hear it." Mara stood on the sidewalk outside the daycare in the December cold and said, "I'm sorry, what?" "The $1,400 arrears," Nadia said pleasantly, "and the month going forward. There's an apartment on the north side that would be more appropriate given the current circumstances. I can be at the diner tomorrow morning or at a location of your choosing if you'd prefer somewhere that isn't your workplace." Mara's hand tightened on the phone. "He had someone look into me. He asks about people who interest him," Nadia said. "It's a habit. One of the better ones." "That's not reassuring." "No," Nadia agreed, and Mara could hear something like genuine amusement in it. "I imagine it isn't. But the apartment is real, and the arrears won't follow you, and you're welcome to come look at it before you decide anything. I'll bring coffee. The good kind." The apartment was on the 14th floor of a building with no signage on the front that Mara could see, which she would later understand was not an oversight. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the north and east sides, a kitchen stocked with things in her and Leo's actual sizes, including a set of small ceramic bowls with painted animals on them that Leo spotted from across the room and made a sound like someone had given him everything he'd ever wanted. There were clothes folded in the second bedroom, her size, not guessed at but precise, and a small bundle on the kitchen counter that Nadia explained was a GPS-linked alert device disguised as a keychain that would send a signal to a specific number if she pressed and held for 3 seconds. "What specific number?" Mara said. "Mr. Volkov's deputy," Nadia said. "And then Mr. Volkov. And if I press it by accident, someone will appear and verify you're fine and then leave." Nadia set her coffee down on the granite counter and looked at Mara with eyes that missed approximately nothing, a family trait Mara would come to understand. "He's not trying to own you," He's trying to make sure you don't disappear because of a heating failure or a man who should know better. Mara thought about Cortlandt Street. She thought about the second notice under her door, the one she'd folded in thirds and put in her coat pocket, and tried not to think about it night when Leo was asleep, and the cold came in through the gap around the window frame. She thought about the way the man in the corner booth had said, "Leo is fine," in 2 words, that somehow covered more ground than any reassurance she'd been given in the past 4 years. "He comes to the diner tomorrow," she said. "Seat 4, corner table. He tips $50. "He does," Nadia said. "Tell him the coffee on Tuesdays is better. Maria makes it on Tuesdays. He should ask for it by name." Nadia looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of someone recalibrating. Then she smiled, small and genuine. "I'll tell him." They moved in on a Thursday. Leo carried his backpack himself and made a sound of profound personal triumph when he discovered that the second bedroom had a window he could press his forehead against to fog the glass. And Mara stood in the kitchen with her hands flat on the cold granite counter and thought about what she was inside of, and whether it was a kindness or a cage, and found that she could not yet tell. James came to the diner the following Tuesday. He ordered the coffee by Maria's name. When Mara brought it, he looked up at her with that same unhurried attention and said, "Thank you for the recommendation." She said, "You're welcome," and moved to the next table and felt his eyes on her back for 3 more steps before they released her. The weeks moved the way December weeks do in a city that has decided fully to be Christmas, layered with lights and the particular desperation of people trying to buy the feeling they want. Mara worked her shifts. Leo went to the new daycare, a better one, 2 blocks from the apartment, which Nadia had enrolled him in with the specific bureaucratic efficiency of someone who did this regularly. He came home with macaroni art and opinions about which of his new classmates was funny and which ones were loud. And Mara listened to all of it at the kitchen table over the small painted animal bowls and let herself be restored by it, the way you let yourself be restored by warm water. She ran into Dex outside the diner on a Thursday afternoon. He looked at her coat, the new one Nadia had left in the apartment wardrobe, and something moved across his face. "That's new?" he said. "It is," she said. "Someone buy that for you?" She looked at him steadily. "I have to get back." "I heard you moved," he said. "Cortlandt Street. Found a new situation, did you?" The word situation sat in his mouth the way contempt always sat in his mouth, like something he was already chewing. "I hope you know what you're doing, Mara. I really do. Because whatever this is, it's not going to end well for you. Men like that, they're not interested in single mothers with nothing to offer." She walked back into the diner and did not let herself stop walking until she was through the swinging door into the break room, and then she stood with her back against the wall for 30 seconds, breathing the way she had stood against walls before and would stand against walls again, because that was the thing about surviving things. It did not stop requiring the 30 seconds. Then she went back out and finished her shift. Nadia relayed the exchange to James, as Mara learned later, in a brief message that was relayed back to her by way of a single line delivered by James's deputy, a measured man named Alexei, who had the professional courtesy of someone who treated every errand he ran as a matter of national importance. He found her at the diner counter on a Friday morning and set down a folded card that read, in James's handwriting, which she recognized from the reservation log, simply, "He won't be near the diner again. He can contact you about Leo through the arrangement. Nothing else." Mara read it twice, then put it in her apron pocket and served the next table. It was 10 days before Christmas, late in the evening, when James came to the apartment. Not unannounced, Nadia had texted her an hour before, saying simply that her brother wanted to check on the apartment situation. Mara had Leo bathed and in pajamas by the time the knock came, soft and 3 times. The kind of knock that expects to be answered rather than demanding it. Leo heard it first. He launched himself off the couch and made it to the door before Mara could say a word. And she followed him and took hold of the door handle herself and opened it. James stood in the hallway with his jacket over one arm and no tie. Without the tie, he looked slightly less like an institution and slightly more like a person, which Mara's body registered before her mind caught up. "Come in," she said. He came in. He looked at the apartment briefly, taking inventory the way people do when they want to see if a place has become someone's home or is still just a place someone is staying. And Mara saw something in his face that she would not have been able to describe precisely, but that landed on her like a confirmation of something she hadn't known she was waiting for. Leo had positioned himself directly in front of James and was looking up at him with his arms slightly raised, which was Leo's physical vocabulary for requiring a closer look. James crouched down, which put him at Leo's eye level, and Leo immediately grabbed his wrist with both hands and said, "You're bigger than you look sitting down." "So are you," James said. Leo appeared deeply gratified by this. He released the wrist and ran back to the kitchen table where his crayons were still out, and resumed whatever he had been drawing with the specific focused energy of someone who has accomplished the social interaction they needed and can now return to their actual project. Mara offered coffee. James accepted it. They sat at the kitchen table with Leo between them, working on a drawing that grew more elaborate by the minute. And Mara found, in a way that she did not fully examine at the time, that the room felt different with him in it. Not smaller, the way rooms feel when certain people occupy them. Larger, more settled. James finished his coffee and stood to leave, and Leo, without looking up from his drawing, said, "Come back." James looked at Mara. She looked back at him, and the thing in his face then, at that specific moment, was something she let herself see plainly, because not seeing it required an effort she had stopped making about 20 minutes earlier. "Yes," he said. To Leo, but not only to Leo. He did come back. 3 evenings in the next week, each one quieter and more extended than the last. He brought nothing and asked for nothing, and sat at her kitchen table or near the window with the city lights behind him and talked to Leo with the attentiveness of someone who found the child's conversation genuinely useful, and talked to Mara in the low, unhurried way of someone who had decided to say things that were true rather than things that were effective. She learned things sideways, that he had run the organization since his father died 8 years earlier, that Nadia was 26 and thought herself more prepared than she was, and had been told this by everyone, and would keep needing to learn it on her own. That he had a preference for the Tuesday coffee at the diner that had less to do with Maria's technique than with the specific hour of morning when the diner was quiet enough that he could think. And then, on the 3rd evening of that last week, he went looking for a crayon for Leo, because Leo had run through the red and was requiring more red urgently. And he opened the kitchen drawer where Mara kept the extra crayons and found, between the cherry red and the brick red, the drawing Leo had finished 2 nights before and left there. She saw him find it. She was at the counter with her back to the table, and she heard the particular quality of silence change. The way silence changes when something has shifted in the room rather than in the noise. And she turned around. He was looking at the paper. It was a crayon drawing in Leo's style, which was vigorous and categorical. 3 figures holding hands, labeled in Leo's invented spelling. She knew without moving what the labels said. She had seen it when Leo finished it. Mama on the left, me in the middle, Daddy on the right. The figure on the right was tall and had a suit, rendered in charcoal gray, with the careful attention that Leo reserved for things he found particularly worth capturing. James set the drawing down on the table slowly. His jaw was set, but not with anger. With something quieter than anger and considerably more permanent. Mara set down the mug she was holding. She crossed the kitchen. She picked up the drawing and looked at it, and then looked at him. "He's 4, she said. "He decides things." "He does," James said. And then, in the way of a man who has found the thing he was looking for without having searched for it, he said, "Mara." Just her name. 2 syllables. The way you say someone's name when you mean everything that comes after it. She put the drawing down between them on the table and let herself look at him plainly, without the reading the room, without the safety inventory, without the 30 years of knowing that the best she could do was read the air before it turned against her. She looked at him the way you look at the thing you have already decided about. Once you are ready to let yourself know you've decided. That was a Thursday. On a Saturday morning, he was still there. He had his coffee at her counter, no newspaper, and Leo was in the other room, explaining something at length to his stuffed bear. And Mara leaned against the counter and looked at the city through the window, the gray December sky over the rooftops, and felt the particular quality of the air in that kitchen, and let herself be still inside it. She might have let the stillness last. It lasted until Monday, when the daycare called. The number was Alexei's, not the daycare's. She knew from the first second. She picked up and heard his voice, level and measured, and heard the word Leo before she heard anything else, and the world went very small and very specific. The way it does when the thing you cannot afford to happen becomes the only thing there is. Goran Petric had sent 2 men to the daycare with a forged emergency contact form, which bore a false name but a real phone number. It had been processed by a staff member who would not make that error again. Leo was not there. He was, Alexei told her, somewhere Goran intended to use as a variable in a negotiation he planned to have with James. Mara already had her coat on when Alexei finished the sentence. She also had her hand around the keychain in her pocket, the one Nadia had set on the kitchen counter on the first day and explained, and which Mara had kept in her coat pocket every day since, because she was a woman who had spent 4 years learning the specific difference between security theater and actual preparation. She pressed and held for 3 seconds. Then she called Alexei back and told him the last location Goran's name had come up in Leo's daycare intake form, a detail she had read and cataloged and memorized the way she cataloged everything that came through her hands, because her memory for logistics was precise and her instinct for which details mattered had been her sharpest survival tool since long before any of this. Alexei was silent for 2 seconds. "That's the Mariner building," he said. "East side." "I know it is," she said. "I used to walk past it every day on the way to my old apartment." She did not go to the Mariner building herself. That was not her part. She knew that, and she did not romanticize her part or minimize it. Her part was the 3-second press and the address, and those 2 things mattered the way quiet things matter, completely and without needing to be loud about it. It took James 47 minutes from the alert to have Leo back. She learned the details gradually, not from James directly, but from Alexei's precise after-action language, and Nadia's somewhat less precise, but considerably more vivid version. Goran had expected negotiation. He had not factored in the specificity of the address or the speed of a man who had already made the decision about what this was before the call connected. James did not send people. He went with Alexei and 2 others, and he was cold and he was procedural, and Goran was delivered to an outcome that would remove him from this city and anything adjacent to it for a long time. without a scene that would require anyone to call the police or file a report or explain to a room full of strangers what a forged emergency contact form was. Leo was brought to the apartment at 7:40 in the evening. He walked in with Alexei's hand on his shoulder and looked around, saw Mara, and said, "Mama, I got a ride in a really fast car." She pulled him in and held on for a long moment, and he allowed it with the patient tolerance of a child who understood, in the way children do, that this particular hug was about something larger than the hug. James came in 10 minutes after, and she looked at his face from across the room, and they did not need to say anything for a while. There are moments when a silence does more work than speech can, and this was one of them. This was, she said eventually, "You should know. The address." He hadn't given it to me. I remembered it from the intake form. The form had his name on it as a reference for someone else's child. James looked at her for a long beat. "I know," he said. "I'm telling you because I want you to understand I'm not a variable in this. I'm a person who does the part she can do." "Yes," he said. He crossed the room and stood in front of her, and his hand came up and settled against the side of her face, carefully, in the way you touch something you have decided you are responsible for. "I know exactly who you are, Mara." She put her hand over his and held it there. And Leo, from the couch, said, without looking up from his bear, "Are you two going to do the face-touching thing for a while? Because I need my dinner." Christmas Eve was a Thursday, and the diner ran its last service before the holiday with a full house from 5 o'clock on. Mara worked the floor in the red apron that was the diner's festive designation, and the tinsel on the wreath had been supplemented with a string of small white lights that someone had wound through it at a diagonal. It was the kind of beautiful that costs $11 at the pharmacy, and she loved it unreservedly. She was carrying a plate of the Christmas special, roast chicken with potatoes, when Dex arrived. He came in with two men she didn't recognize, wearing a jacket that was newer than the last one, and an expression that told her he had prepared something to say. He spotted her crossing the floor and positioned himself between her and the counter, because he had always been good at geometry of that kind. "I heard about the thing with your boy," he said. "Leo." He said Leo's name the way he said things he wanted to seem like they cost him something. "That must have been hard." "He's fine," she said. Sure, I'm just saying. Things like that make you think." He glanced around the diner with the same measured contempt she recognized from the first time, then back at her. "You know, I talked to some people about this Volkov situation. And Mara, I just have to be honest with you, because somebody should be." He dropped his voice to the register he used for private cruelties. "You're in over your head. I know you think you're doing something here. But you're a waitress with a kid and no savings, and you've always been the kind of woman who, I don't know, who mistakes a man paying attention for something it isn't, you know?" She looked at him. Her hands were steady around the plate. "You look like you've put on weight since you moved," he added, as a clarification. The diner had gone quiet in the way it had gone quiet the first morning. But this time the quiet was different. Because this time, there were more people in it, and the quality of the silence had an audience to it, a held-breath witness to it. James came through the door at 7:52. He was not alone. Alexei was behind him, and Nadia beside Alexei, and two men she didn't know whose job description she understood, without needing it, explained. James was in a dark suit and no overcoat, because cold did not seem to inconvenience him the way it inconvenienced other people. And he crossed the floor with the specific, unhurried certainty of someone who has already decided how this room ends. He looked at Dex once. Dex went still the way small animals go still when something larger enters the frame of their awareness, and they are calculating whether motion or stillness is the better strategy. James put his hand at the small of Mara's back. A single declarative gesture, no performance in it, simply a placement that said what it meant. He looked at the diner, the counter stools, the booths, the cook watching through the service window. And then he said to Dex, in a voice low enough that it did not need to be louder, "You're done speaking to her." Dex's mouth opened and closed. "About her weight," James said. "About her income. About her choices. About Leo. You're done." Nadia, from 3 feet to James's left, made no expression whatsoever. Which Mara had come to understand was Nadia's expression for something meeting her expectations perfectly. "The custody arrangement," Dex started, "goes through an attorney," James said. "His name is Gregor Hess. He knows to call you." He looked at Dex with the precise, settled quality of a man who has looked at harder things than this and found them equally manageable. "That's the arrangement. Hess will explain it." Dex looked at Mara. She looked back at him, and she did not fill the look with anything he could use. Not anger, not satisfaction, not any of the things she had rehearsed in the years when she'd thought she would want them. She just looked at him steadily, the way you look at something you have finished with. He left. The diner breathed out. Leo was at the corner booth, having been brought by Alexei from the apartment 20 minutes prior, because Mara had not been informed of this plan and would have argued against it if she had. But she was standing with her heart very full, looking at her son sitting in the booth where this had all begun, with his shoes on this time, coloring. James sat down across from him. Leo looked up and said, "I drew you again." He pushed the paper across the table. This one was more detailed. 3 figures, holding hands. The labels had improved in their spelling: Mama, me, and, in the third position, Dad. James sat for a long moment with the drawing in his hands. Mara watched from across the floor, the chicken plate still in her hands, warm. Then he looked up at her over Leo's head and said, "Come sit down." She handed the chicken off to the nearest waitress, untied her apron, and crossed the floor, and slid into the seat beside Leo, who immediately leaned against her arm with the full, comfortable weight of a child who knows where home is. The city below the 14th floor apartment was extravagant with Christmas lights. They came home after the diner closed, Nadia staying for the hour it took to get Leo bathed and into his pajamas. And she sat on the couch with him while he insisted on explaining every figure in the drawing again, and then fell asleep mid-explanation with his cheek against Nadia's knee. And Nadia looked down at him with the expression of someone who has been handed a very large, complicated feeling and is deciding whether to admit it. "He calls me Nadia," she said quietly. "He calls everyone by their first name," Mara said. "He doesn't see the point of titles." "Smart," Nadia said. James lifted Leo without waking him and carried him to the second bedroom, and came back to find Mara at the window. She was looking at the city, the lights going down in long lines through the dark. The particular way December turns a city into something that looks, from 14 floors up, like a promise. She heard him come to stand beside her, and felt the warmth of him at her shoulder, and leaned back slightly. And he put his arm around her from behind, and they stood like that for a while without talking. "He'll need things," she said eventually. "Leo? A school, a yard probably. He asks about a yard." "I know a house," James said. "Of course you do. North side? Large yard. Good school 2 blocks east." He paused. "It has a kitchen that faces the garden." She tilted her head back to look at him. He was looking at the lights below, the set of his jaw calm, The particular expression she had catalogued first as containment and understood now as steadiness. The thing underneath the containment. The architecture that held when other things fell. "He named you in the drawing," she said. "Yes." "He's 4. He decides things." "Yes," James said. He looked down at her then, and she turned in his arms to face him, and the lights of the city were behind them, and the apartment was quiet and warm. "He also gets them right." She reached up and put her hand against the side of his jaw, the same gesture he had offered her, and he turned his face slightly into her palm, and she felt that in her chest, in the specific way of things that are real and solid and not going anywhere. Nadia's coat was by the door. She came out of the living room with her bag over one shoulder and looked at both of them near the window and said, "I'll see myself out. Merry Christmas." She stopped with her hand on the door and said, without turning around, "I told him about you before he asked. Just so you know." The door closed behind her. Outside, somewhere below 14 floors of city, a church was ringing midnight, the sound coming up thin and clear through the glass, and the lights spread outward in every direction. And inside the apartment, Leo was asleep in his room with his shoes off and his bear in the crook of his arm. And his newest drawing was on the kitchen table under the ceramic bowl with the painted rabbit on it, weighted down so it wouldn't move. Mara stood at the window with James's arm around her, and the city in its full December arrangement below them. The cold was out there, the rent arrears that no longer existed, the pink notices that had been resolved in the quietly procedural way his organization resolved things, the attorney named Hess who had explained the new arrangement to Dex, the building that had no sign on the front because everyone who needed to know what it was already knew. In here there was warm light and a refrigerator that was still stocked, and a drawing on the kitchen table with 3 figures holding hands. She had not named herself anything yet, not out loud, not to him. She had been learning how, in the way you learn things you were never taught, slowly and with the specific attention of someone who knows the cost of getting it wrong. She looked at the lights below and at his hand where it rested on her arm, and she said quietly, "The way you say things that are already decided. We're home." He didn't answer with words. He pulled her slightly closer, and his mouth touched the top of her head, and that was the answer, whole and unhurried and unmistakable. Below them, the city kept its lights on all the way to the horizon,